If you listen to TikTok therapists, many of them will tell you to immediately cut toxic people out of your life. But some people can't just be removed from our lives like that. And in other cases, maybe they could, but should they? So I'm going to give you the 3 types of toxic people you may be dealing with in your life, and I'm going to suggest who, when, and why to cut them out of your life. So basically, there are 3 things we can do to deal with the toxic people in our lives. We can cut them out, we can manage them, or we can endure them. So first of all, we just need to define toxic people. You can go watch my video, What is a Toxic Person?, where I explain in 6 minutes how they can be identified and defined. The short version is, it's someone who consistently makes you modify your behavior in a negative way. They typically leave you feeling drained and questioning your own sanity. Let's start with the first category, new friends. People you date, people you run into through friends, or people you study with, or people who make an active effort to get to know you, but you realize they're toxic. So if they're not already integrated into your life, like your family or your group of friends, there's really no reason to let them into your life at all. And the simple litmus test you can use is just like, how do they make you feel after hanging out with them? Do you always leave an interaction with them feeling worse on some level? I'd say for these types of people, don't negotiate. No long goodbye. Some toxic people will try to suck you right in. But if you're not already invested, if they're not somehow integrated into your life, I would just say, get the hell out of there. Get away from them. Now, this can be a little tricky if it's a friend of a friend, for example. I knew a guy who was hanging out with several of my friends. At one point, I realized this guy was toxic and potentially dangerous, and I decided I want nothing to do with this guy anymore. So I told my friends, listen, this is how I feel about this guy. If he's invited, don't invite me. And this actually caused some problems in my life. Sometimes I wouldn't go to events because I knew he was there. And also, my friends thought I was kind of crazy. But finally, after a couple years, he had a complete meltdown. It turned out he had a crush on someone in our friend circle, and this person started dating another person in our friend circle, and he started stalking both of them and threatening them and leaving weird phone calls. And all of a sudden, everyone saw, oh my God, this guy is absolutely toxic. We want nothing to do with him, and it was such a relief. But it was also kind of a little maddening that they weren't able to see through it. Just to make the point that this can be hard. The second category is a little more tricky. Sometimes you are just more or less forced to spend time with someone toxic. So most of the time this could be like at your work, or it could be if a good friend or family member of yours gets a new partner and this person just turns out to be toxic. Let's start with work. Let's say you have a colleague or a boss who's toxic. I think it's best to take a Stoic approach. What would Seneca do? Well, Seneca actually wrote about this, and he ended up concluding that it costs me nothing to appease the fool. And since I have to deal with this fool, in Seneca's case 2,000 years ago, why don't I just do that, stroke his ego, and leave it at that, and keep the interactions at a minimum, and be happy with that? I think this makes sense, and I've actually done the same with a few people I was forced to work with for several years. This one guy especially pushed my patience to the limits. But I ended up seeing him sort of like the scorpion in the Scorpion and the Frog fable. Meaning he just couldn't help himself trying to manipulate others in order to please his narcissism. And I ended up feeling sorry for him. But I got in the habit of just knowing how to deal with him, accept most of his quirky whims, and also know where my limits were, so I didn't ultimately ended up changing my own behavior too much around him. I have to admit, this was very challenging, but I made it through. Now, other people's toxic partners can be a little more tricky. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe now. It is a huge help for me, and it's completely free to you, so win-win. Thank you. A friend of mine actually decided to drop one of her best friends because this new friend entered into a relationship with a toxic person. Now this person started reaching out to my friend, constantly trying to manipulate her behavior, essentially. And since her friend was obsessed with this new fiance of hers, my friend ultimately made the decision to just cut her loose. I don't know that I would have done that. I would have probably tried to engage with the person the same way I dealt with my Scorpion colleague. That is, engage minimally, grin, and bear it. This group of people should perhaps in the perfect world be cut out of our lives, but that's just not always possible. Sometimes you have to make a trade-off, and sometimes that's just not worth it. Finally, there's the last and hardest group to deal with, family. Some therapists, even licensed ones, will tell you to just, without hesitation, cut these people, toxic family members, out of your life. But remember, we're not necessarily talking about people who abused you or made your life a living hell. We're talking about people who just happen to have an unfortunate constellation of personality traits that make them toxic for other people to be around. So they're not necessarily bad people per se. They can just be extremely taxing to be around. So that's one risk. You risk cutting people out of your life that are actually just annoying bastards, but not dangerous per se. In the case of family, I would once again advocate a Stoic approach, especially if we're talking parents or siblings. You only have one family, and the problem is, even if you cut them out of your life, they're still your family. So you might as well try to endure and get some good strategies for how to do that. I think cutting family members completely out of your life is rarely worth the cost. The long-term fallout can be hard to predict, and there can be some weird downstream consequences that you're not considering right now. It could come back to haunt you. Also, odds are you're not just going to lose that one person, you could create a ripple effect. And if this person is truly toxic, well, maybe they smear you behind your back, and maybe you lose touch with people you love and want to stay in your life. A few documented things through research that doesn't work. Don't try to fix or fundamentally change toxic family members. It almost never works. Also, try to avoid engaging in direct confrontation with them. It just makes things escalate instead of resolving them. And if you do decide to cut them off, don't do so without preparation and without making sure that you have support. This can actually lead to long-term guilt and social isolation. There are a few documented potentially useful strategies. Redefine the relationship, shift expectations, stop expecting them to ever change. And there's the gray rock method. I'm not a huge fan of this. It's essentially that you interact with them in a flat, neutral, and boring way. And the logic here is that you deprive them of your emotional reaction because that works as fuel for them. So when you stop giving them fuel, they will typically direct their attention to somewhere else where they will get fuel. You're essentially removing reinforcement from their behaviors. Finally, you can try to cognitively reframe what's going on. You can't control them, but you can control the meaning you attach to their behavior. This comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, and I do believe this is a useful method. So when they criticize you, for instance, or make you feel bad, you reframe it as, well, they're criticizing me because they're anxious, not because I'm actually worthless or whatever it is. So in this framing, their hostility is their issue, not a truth about you. Finally, you can try to use a method called radical acceptance. You may not like or approve of your family member's behavior, but if you accept it as reality, a fact of life, that prevents you wasting energy trying to fight it. Again, it has to do with reframing how things are. Instead of thinking they shouldn't be like this, you reframe it as they are like this. I choose how I respond. This goes hand in hand with Stoicism. So you don't need to like them, you don't need to trust them, but cutting them could create wounds that you will regret later. And in the case of family members, you also risk hurting people you do love and who love you. Thanks for listening.